If you're waiting for someone to come and save you from a sucky work life, it may be a while. This is the cold, hard, and much-needed truth from Elizabeth Lotardo, today's guest on the Desuckify Work Podcast. Elizabeth is the author of Leading Yourself. Find more joy, meaning, and opportunities in the job you already have. Despite imperfect bosses, weird economies, lethargic coworkers, annoying systems, and too many deliverables. She's also an employee engagement consultant and a LinkedIn learning instructor. Her superpower, her pudding in my lingo, is an optimal blend of straight talk and empathy. So messages get through and you feel inspired to do something about it. Her message, for those looking to desuckify work, focus on what you can control versus blaming external factors. Change your load-bearing beliefs about work that are keeping you stuck, like thinking work sucks, for instance. Don't tolerate abuse, but make the most of typical work challenges, reframing them as opportunities for learning and growth. And ditch the traditional employee engagement surveys, like Gallup, and try one rooted in a self-leadership perspective. The big takeaway? Take ownership of your career. No one else will, and no one will ever care about it as much as you. Tough love? Maybe, but love nonetheless. I loved this conversation with Elizabeth, and I think you will too. If you enjoy the episode, please like, share, rate, review, or subscribe to the podcast. Let the desuckifying begin. Here's Elizabeth. Okay, Elizabeth Lotardo, welcome to the Desuckify Work Podcast.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, thanks for coming on. I'm excited to dig into a lot of stuff, but I think your perspective on this idea of self-leadership is really interesting. And I think there's room for some debate around it. Not that we need to debate, but I think it'll be interesting to sort of see where you fall relative to me and maybe our perspective on where everyone else might fall on this.
I welcome a debate. I'm so over the corporate ass kissing, so let's get into it.
That's awesome. Yeah, I think most of us are, but we don't know how to break out of it. Right?
Yeah, right.
It's just been like, let's be quiet and polite to each other. And there's kindness, and then there is muted everything.
Yeah, absolutely. And we're seeing the fallout of some of that now.
I think you're right. Well, before we get too deep into some of that fun stuff, you want to give us just a quick background? What are you doing for work and how you came to be doing it?
Sure. So I'm Elizabeth Lotardo. I'm the author of the book, Leading Yourself. I'm an employee engagement consultant, and I'm also a LinkedIn learning instructor. I've had the privilege of teaching almost 2 million people how to lead themselves inside their current jobs. I write for HBR, Fast Company, a bunch of other places. You've probably seen me on LinkedIn.
Awesome. That's really cool. The LinkedIn thing is interesting because I don't think I've met too many people who are instructors there. How did you find yourself in that space?
Well, there's a lot of us these days, but I was one of the early ones. So I was first an online instructor with a company called lynda.com, which was acquired by LinkedIn,
I remember that.
and became LinkedIn Learning, which has now been acquired by Microsoft. So I've been on quite the journey.
Yeah, awesome. So I'm curious for you, what role does work play in your life?
It's evolving.
Yeah.
Work for me on the best days is emotionally fulfilling and really gratifying and something I'm proud of.
Mm-hmm.
And on the worst days, it's a huge thorn in my side. And I think all of us have that experience, even the people who study how to make work suck less.
Yeah, I would agree. I know it's true for me. There are times where I beat myself up for it because I'm sitting here going, well, I'm trying to make work suck less, and yet sometimes it still sucks. But I also think that's just human reality. What do you notice on the day, what's different on the days where it is really vibing for you and then on the days where it does just kind of suck?
Well, it's ironic that both of us have days that suck because we do share a mission to desuckify work.
Yeah.
There's a saying in publishing that is, if you ever want to know what a writer struggles with, look at the title of their book. Because that's the problem that they have to spend a lot of time solving. And that certainly plays out for me. I have a lot less suck days than I used to, but for a long time, I hated my job. And I thought that was everyone else's fault but mine.
Yeah. And that's an interesting thing because we all fall into that, right? It's their fault. It's the system's fault. It's the company's fault. It's the industry's fault, whatever. And I don't want to pretend like everybody doesn't play a part, but I like how you shift it back to ourselves and think about like, well, what do I have control over? What do I have agency over? So I'll start there. I mean, what can we really impact when it comes to our career?
More than you think. And I like the distinction that you drew. Self-leadership and making the most of imperfect circumstances is not synonymous with tolerating injustice or letting abusive behavior slide.
Yeah.
There's a spectrum here. But the vast majority of organizations are simply annoying sometimes. They're not necessarily abusive.
Yeah.
And when we're met with annoying circumstances, we can control our mindset. That's the most powerful thing, how we respond to change, how we react, how we internalize. We can control our behavior, what we say, what we do. We can control our relationships to some degree and how we're shaping those, even our relationship with people who are, quote, in charge. So when we shift the focus away from what everyone else is doing wrong and why they suck to what levers are at my disposal, we feel more empowered, and that translates to higher engagement.
So how do some of those things? Because they all sound great, right? Like, okay, I can change my attitude about my annoying boss or whatever, but I don't know that I know exactly what that entails. So how do you?
Let me give you an example. Let me give you a brain hack.
Yeah.
So one brain hack that I use that I wrote about in my book is called "This Is My Chance." And I first learned this practice from a woman named Tessa Romero, and how she uses it is as a forcing function for your brain to find the opportunity inside of a frustrating situation. So let's say I walk into work on Monday morning, I'm in a good mood, then my boss waltzes on over and says, all the deliverables I turned in last week don't matter. We're changing direction. He saw a TikTok over the weekend and now everything is different. It'd be really easy for me to sit in that seat and say, why does this happen to me? He sucks. This is so unfair. And some of that is true, but it's not going to change the reality sitting in it. So I can use "this is my chance" in that moment. This is my chance to lead up and respectfully push back on this change of direction. This is my chance to make my strategic voice heard. This is my chance to model adaptability and show it to the rest of my team. This is my chance to make a mental note of this and bring it up during a 360 review. Forcing your brain to identify, all right, this situation sucks. Where's my opportunity? How am I coming out on top, even if it's not obvious?
Yeah, that's interesting because the language of it feels like it does a lot of the work because it shifts your brain immediately into sort of agency mode. This is my chance. And it actually has like a hint of excitement in the language, which is interesting, right? This is my chance.
Your situation a gift in a way. And again, some situations are not tolerable, but for the baseline level of annoyance, this is my chance helps me and has helped my clients step into the moment feeling better. And we know when you're feeling better, you drive different outcomes.
Yeah. And I even wonder if that language can help us get clearer on whether that behavior is sort of over the line, meaning this is my chance to evaluate this behavior and see if it falls within or outside of my boundaries.
That's a great point. And if this is my chance to take a punch on the chin is a repeated theme, then this is your chance to leave.
Yeah. How do you find navigating that boundaries for people works? Meaning, that spectrum you talk about, right? And I think most people at some point have probably been in a situation that feels at least right on the edge of that spectrum, if not fully toxic. And I guess there's some room for us to decide where our lines are, but ultimately some situations can be really bad. But you may not see it because you're in it. How do you assess it fairly and accurately so that you're not just taking an annoying thing and making it toxic all the time, but you're also not allowing yourself to sort of sit in something that could be really harmful?
Great question. And that is one I wrestled with when I was writing my book. And I included this huge chart of examples and put them into categories of annoying, like baseline, like garbage, like really rough, and abusive. And those three categories can help us determine where is this falling. And the two lenses I like to look through to place something into whether it's annoying, abusive, or garbage is intent and frequency.
Okay.
Was the situation or the action done of malicious intent? Someone meant to really cause you harm?
Yeah.
Is it a repeated occurrence? Or is it a one-off issue?
Yeah.
An example of that would be, okay, your boss comes in one day and says, I'm really tired of you not reading my emails thoroughly. There's typos all over this presentation.
Yeah.
That's probably annoying.
Yeah.
Because if it was a one-off issue, we're going to assume this person's having a bad day, which we all do.
Yeah.
If the degree of it isn't, you idiot, I can't believe, never approving your PTO again, right? That's probably not the case. And the intent was probably not to make you feel completely awful.
Yeah.
It was probably just to get the work product that they asked for. So to depersonalize ourselves from the situation and accurately assess, hey, is this a one-off issue? Was the intent actually bad? And is this really severe? Is an exercise in self-assessment and gauging what is your line in the sand on what's crossable and what's not.
Yeah, it seems like there's a certain amount of emotional intelligence required here, right? Because I can see drifting either way, either just like hearing that and going, oh my God, how dare he? He's the worst human ever. I'm quitting tomorrow. Like I could see getting to that place because it's like, it would probably really agitate me in the moment. And then I could see also just kind of like, and this is sort of an interesting piece of this, like, oh, that's just Steve. That's just how Steve shows up, right? And we tend to enable that, particularly if somebody's a really high performer or they seem to get a lot of results or they're at a power position and everybody else seems to like them. And you kind of go, oh, I guess that's just how he is. How do you navigate that? And what, if you're struggling to navigate it, how do you sort of ramp up your skills relatively quickly at that stuff?
I'll take the first side of that question first. To me, a helpful exercise in assessing, like, okay, is this just me? Like, am I the crazy one in this situation?
Yeah.
Is a concept that comes from us from positive psychology called psychological distancing,
Okay.
which is to remove yourself from the situation and imagine your friend was right there. And they came to you hot, right? They are mad at that boss that just said this to them.
Yeah.
What advice are you going to give them? And it sounds cheesy, but it totally works.
Yeah.
Because your brain takes a different seat at the proverbial table of this situation. So they'd probably validate your feelings, right? Like, you're right. You don't deserve to be treated like that.
Yeah.
And that's true.
Yeah.
And they're also going to say, you have rent due every month. So let's take a breath and make a real plan here beyond range quitting. Which gets to the second part of your question. How do you upskill yourself quickly?
Yeah.
There's never been a more opportune moment to upskill yourself than there is right now. You can become a genius at anything for free because of the internet, for better or worse.
Yeah.
But I would say things like LinkedIn Learning, obviously I'm tight with them, so shameless plug. Podcasts, books, expanding your network, all of those things become wind at your back when it is time to move.
Yeah, I can see the benefit of all of those things. I think sometimes it's just simply acknowledging that this is a skill that you should be developing. The skill of self-awareness and awareness of how you see others and how you can regulate your emotions around that. Because I think when we're in it, sometimes we don't even realize that that's the thing we need to be paying attention to, right?
Well, you're the common denominator in all of your workplace experiences. So there's that like dating example where if someone says all their exes are crazy, you know they're crazy.
Yeah.
If all your jobs have sucked and if all your bosses are assholes, I'm going to give you some tough truth. Either your expectations are unrealistic, you're really bad at picking, which is something you can change.
Yeah.
But there's something you're doing here that's contributing to the same maddening result.
Yeah, that's a really interesting point. And it brings me to something, my own example that I want to get into. And I want to mention the full title of your book because I love the full title of your book. You mentioned it's Leading Yourself, but then there's this really long but it makes me kind of chuckle. Subtitle: Find more joy, meaning, and opportunities in the job you already have. And then in parentheses, despite imperfect bosses, weird economies, lethargic coworkers, annoying systems, and too many deliverables. Like you feel it as you're saying it, and we all kind of laugh at it, but you're also like, yeah, but
That's it.
But those things, and like, I know in my own experience, I worked in advertising for 25 years or so, and I bounced around a fair amount. And so I like this note of the job you already have and finding joy and meaning in it. Because I think I struggled with that at times. And I wasn't necessarily sitting there going, everybody here sucks. Like I wasn't doing that. It was just more like, I don't know. I want to go see what else is out there. I wonder, I think I was chasing something that was in my head that was maybe a slightly more perfect version of something. And to some degree, there were times where I found it and then I still got tired of it because I think I just get bored of things. But I'm curious, I think there's a lot of that instinct to jump ship when things get a little tough, or we are just bored, or we're just wondering, is it better over at company X that my friend works at? So what do you say to somebody who's maybe bounced around a little bit, and maybe they're tired of bouncing around? Maybe they're like, I would really like to sort of settle in some place, but they just don't know how to do it. How do you do it?
Valid. I mean, you're talking to someone who also started their career in advertising, who also bounced around, who also has raging ADHD, like so many of us in advertising do. Yeah. So I'm not exactly the poster child for corporate compliance for decades on end. Mm-hmm. But what I will share with you is the research and what I study. And we have a great proof point in this bouncing around, searching in the Great Resignation. So the Great Resignation is that period of peak talent turnover from the end of 2020 to the start of 2021. Okay. Everybody seemingly jumped ship. We saw turnover like we've never seen. Mm-hmm. And from an organizational psychologist perspective, this was fascinating. Yeah. But the vast majority of people leaving their jobs reported that they were leaving for more emotional fulfillment, more opportunities, more joy, a different experience. So I'm like, okay, we're going to watch how this plays out. 2 years later, in 2023, there was a big survey conducted that hit over 350 organizations targeting people who had quit during the Great Resignation. Okay. 80% of them said they regretted quitting during the Great Resignation.
Really?
80%. Wow. 80% of people who sought greener pastures regretted it. 60% of people tried to get their old job back, and engagement fell, despite people searching to be more engaged. So what does that tell us? You can change the circumstances, but until the individual changes, nothing's really going to change.
Yeah, and that's an interesting sort of like under the microscope example of what maybe when we were at our most emotionally agitated too, right? And so the pandemic sort of stirred stuff in us, and then opportunity showed up in the form of oh my God, everybody's hiring now, which is weird. We didn't expect that. We thought COVID was just going to shut the economy down for forever. And then, you jump and you get more money, seemingly more, opportunities for more joy and meaning. And then, you're still there. Yeah. And you still have all your stuff with you. And then there's this psychological thing also of when you place a lot of expectation on the new thing, really hard for the new thing to really live up to that. So all of that feels like that maybe melded together in that situation, or am I misreading it?
It's an adrenaline crash. I just wrote a piece for Fast Company about how to preserve new hire enthusiasm to address exactly what you said. And what the research tells us is that new hire enthusiasm plummets by 30% by the second week of work. Which is a heartbreaking statistic. Yeah. And now the talent landscape is really different than when it was in the Great Resignation. Those opportunities are not as frequent as they once were. So the disengagement doesn't look for a new job. It just dissociates in the current job, which is why we saw a rise of things like quiet quitting. Yeah. So the emotional sentiment and the unrest is still present, but the moves have slowed down.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting because it feels like there's sort of a work therapy thing that needs to happen here for a lot of us. Like, right, just kind of like get really clear on what we should be expecting from work and getting really clear on how we can impact that. And the first part of that, I know, is something we talked about when we initially chatted a little while back. And how do you navigate your expectations around work? And especially when you really crave something big from work.
Our expectations of worth are through the freaking roof in a way they never have been before.
Yeah.
And that's because of a couple things. First, we're seeing everybody else's highlight reel.
Mm-hmm.
The day they got free pizza at work, not the other 364 days of the year. So that's part of it.
Yeah.
We're also fed this narrative culturally that work is a key pillar of our identity. And I think you and I talked about that graphic ikigai that goes around on LinkedIn all the time, where what you love combines with what you're good at, combines with what the world needs, combines with what you get paid for. And it's all this really perfect, emotionally fulfilling experience. And that never happens to anyone. I hate that graphic. And the third reason why our expectations are ridiculously sky high is leadership is in the spotlight. There is so much content around what makes a great leader, what great bosses do, how your one-on-one should be this career-changing conversation. And we expect more than we ever have of our boss, who is an overwhelmed, in some cases, new manager, just a person who, by the way, is not getting this exceptional career support from their boss. So we go into this venture of work with insane expectations. I think grounding ourselves, and we're not going to tolerate abuse, we're not going to tolerate injustice, but they pay you, right? Because it's not fun all the time. Like that's why the money flows to you, not the other way around. And that truth can be sobering, but it's also freeing because it opens the door for good work experiences that aren't perfect, but are good.
Yeah, I like that insight. I mean, it's funny. It reminds me of Mad Men. I don't know if you watched Mad Men, but at one point...
Of course I watched Mad Men.
Yeah, so I remember at one point, and I don't know why I'm blanking on her name, but the primary female character who was really awesome copywriter, and she was saying something like you never tell me I did a good job. And he's like, that's what the money's for. Right? Like he was just like, basically like, pay you. That means I value you. But so I think
we don't want to go all the way back there, right? Good feedback and humanity are important.
But there's a truth in it.
Yeah, there is a truth in it. And honestly, I think the pendulum has swung a little bit too far in terms of what we expect from our workplace experiences and from our bosses and our unwillingness to put some of the legwork in ourselves. Yeah.
And it's funny. I mean, it kind of comes back to the question of like, what role is work playing in your life? And I always like to ask that. And I like to think about it. And it's a question I like to pose sometimes to clients that I work with, because I think if you're clear on that, and I think like for the people who have the sky high expectations and they want the sort of what I'm good at, what I love, and like what the world needs to come together, what I would say is like, go for it. And then just recognize, to your point, how much of that is your responsibility and how much of that is you taking ownership for bringing those things together. And I think even within that, there is this reality that even when work is meeting some of those high-minded criteria, it still can be really fucking hard. And it still can be, like you said, like your boss is a person. So you're working with lots of people, and people are just weird and annoying sometimes. So it's going to be hard. Now, if you're doing it and it's more of that, it's a calling kind of a job, and there are some of us who have it, but don't shy away when the shit falls a little bit. And then you have to realize like, it's going to take a week to get through this horrible mess. Okay. And then don't have that turn your belief into, I thought this was going to be perfect all the time. I think that's where it gets a little crazy.
Your brain finds what it looks for. You'll always find a way to prove the story in your head right. It is both an amazing and maddening human phenomenon that occurs. So if you are going to work every day with this narrative of this place is just the freaking worst, it surely will be for you, friend.
Yeah.
If that's the story in your head, that is the reality you will experience.
Yeah.
And one thing that I often say, and that I say in my book, is it's not on you to find a great job. It's on you to create one. The perfect work experience does not exist.
Yeah.
Every single work experience in this world is going to have at least one of the annoying things I mentioned in the subtitle of my book. At least probably 3 or 4, even the best jobs.
Yeah.
And it's on you to manage that.
Yeah, that's a great point. I actually had a client I was talking to recently about something similar. And it was when you're interviewing for a job, in some ways, you're actually creating that job, meaning it's your opportunity to see what's possible there. Hey, this is kind of what I bring to the table. These are some of the skills I have. These are some things I'm interested in. How might they show up within your organization, or how could they show up within your organization? Because I think for some reason, we just think like the piece of paper with the job description on it, well, that's just it. And I just have to do that thing. And it's like, I don't think you do. There's some limits to how much you can influence, but at some point you can say, this is how I'm going to try to show up for this job. And you can tell your boss, this is how I'm trying to show up for this job. And, how can I do this, and how can you support me in it? What do you think of that perspective, and what else can help us create the job we want versus trying to find it?
It's an interesting perspective. And I think some of the reason we're there is because of the amount of jobs at our fingertips. You can search on LinkedIn forever.
Yeah.
So if you don't see the exact right match for what you're looking for, swipe. And there's a new job, versus working with what you have, and you have no other option but to make it better.
Yeah.
So to me, the first step, if you want a new job, is to give it a true 90-day effort to make your current job the new job. A true 90-day effort, even if you're faking it, to do everything you can, leave it all on the field, as they say. Lead up, be as intentional as you can, ask for opportunities, create these moments, force yourself to find the meaning in the task for 90 days.
Yeah.
And I would say more than half the time, you don't need a new job.
Yeah. Yeah, that is a like shockingly simple thing to do.
Yeah.
When you paint the picture like that, I'm like, okay, well, why wouldn't I have done that in some of those jobs in the past? And why doesn't everybody just do that?
Sassy brain is really hard.
Yeah. So is there more to it? Like it could sound so simple. Is it making the decision and then just going all in, or is there something else underneath that I'm not seeing, or that we're not seeing here?
It is simple, but it's not easy.
Yeah.
And that's why people don't do it. To be able to force yourself to go all in for 90 days. Oh, yeah, easy to understand, right?
Yeah.
You need the self-leadership skills to overcome in 90 days, probably 1,500 hard moments that pull you back to a mindset of victimhood and everyone being wrong.
Yeah.
You need those skills. So intellectually, yeah, this is easy to understand. But can you make reframing a challenge into an opportunity a 1-second exercise that you don't have to think about? Can you extrapolate out your inputs when your boss hands you some insane goal that depends on a million other people? Can you do that fast?
Yeah.
Can you articulate the upside when you're afraid to speak up in a meeting and force your brain to override that amygdala? There are a ton of skills that sit beneath the ability to make a 90-day push.
Do you go into those skills in the book? I mean, do you help people see how they can get to that 1-second turn on some of those things?
I made the playbook, but it takes practice.
Yeah.
So no book has a 180 impact on you just from reading it.
Yeah.
It has an impact on you from implementing. So I have hundreds of tips and techniques and brain hacks and moments and practice prompts that'll help you get there. But the work is for you.
How long does it take for that to really start to stick, some of these hacks you're talking about?
I get this question a lot, and I always say 1 day and 1 year. If you can force yourself to embody self-leadership and fully own your seat, be an empowered person at work and an agent of change, you will see results in one day. You will feel better in recurring meetings. You will have more energy. You will see your colleagues differently. In 1 year, you will be ready for a better job. And you will be eligible for promotion. Your skills will be looked at differently. You will have better ideas. You'll be more creative. You'll be more skilled at giving feedback. So quickly, but it also takes a long time.
Yeah. Yeah. It's probably not the answer everybody wants to hear, right? It's
just read my book and you'll be cured. It is step one, but it is a lot of work.
Yeah. And I think that's its own interesting insight, right? The book phenomenon is real. We just, oh my God, that book's going to save me. And when we read it and we think, well, I read it now, so why isn't my life perfect?
Why didn't the rest of the world read it? Don't they, that's where the problem really starts.
Well, yeah. But I like this idea that it takes time to implement stuff, but we are so impatient and we're so quick to listen to the parts of our brain that say, this isn't working. Damn it, I guess that wasn't a very good or helpful book. So I appreciate the sort of realistic framing. Like, yeah, okay, it is going to be useful to do something day one, and there's going to be something that will change for you there. But the lasting impact is going to take you a year. How does that sort of jibe with the world we live in, which seems so fast? And both fast in terms of the pace of change and like AI is such a good example of this because AI even 3 months ago looks different than it does today. But also just the instant gratification and all that stuff. You mentioned TikTok and that kind of stuff. I mean, we're so used to the like constant stimulation. And how does our brain sort of handle the idea of a year-long learning curve? And is there anything we can do to facilitate that more smoothly?
I'll tell you, my publisher sure wishes I would stop saying the second half of that answer and sell this as a one-day magic fix.
Yeah.
But that answer is genuine. 1 day and 1 year. So how do you gear yourself up for a year?
Yeah.
First, this is not your only job, right? We're talking about things you're executing inside the life you already have. So it's not like you're pressing pause on everything for a year and then the year mark ticks over and suddenly you implement, right? It is an ongoing process. We're continuously building these skills. We're trying them. We're seeing what does and what doesn't work for us. Yeah. The second piece of that answer, I would say is, okay, a year seems like a long time, but what happens if you don't? What will 1 year from now look like if you continue complaining to your spouse every night about how awful everyone is at your job and how it's so unfair? What is a year from you now going to be wishing you right now did? There's this old Chinese proverb that is the best time to plant a tree was 100 years ago, and the second best time is today. Yeah. Don't look back a year from now and wish you stood up for yourself and made changes at work and started to see things differently. You can do a lot here.
Yeah, no, I can appreciate that. I can also appreciate that for whatever reason, there's a part of us that actually doesn't want to change, right? Meaning there's something cozy about our complaints and we build up those patterns of like, part of what my life is complaining to my wife about how shitty work is. That is living. So
it's a version of it.
Yeah. And I think intellectually, we all get, it would be a lot better if I wasn't complaining about my job all the time. But the emotional unwinding that needs to happen there is really tricky. I'm not sure. Do you have any thoughts on that? Because sometimes we're not even aware of how much our emotions have
100%.
Put a blanket around us like that, but they're going to show up. So what can help us navigate the urge to get back into our cozy dysfunction?
I mean, left unprompted, your brain will choose a familiar hell over an unfamiliar heaven every single time. So it's on you to do the prompting.
Yeah.
There's an analogy I use in my book that is sort of related to HGTV. If you've ever seen them take what they call a load-bearing wall out, they have to add in all these support beams. And that's what you have to do if you're trying to remove what I call a load-bearing belief. And a common one is work sucks.
Yeah.
use your vernacular.
Yeah.
This load-bearing belief that has been a pillar in our life. It has driven our expectations. It has driven our decisions. It has driven our relationships, and it has driven our sense of self. So that takes a lot of support beams if we're going to pull that out.
Yeah.
And it's because let's say you were raised with this belief that work sucks, right? Your parents hated their job. They always talked about how awful their bosses were. So you go into your first job and you're expecting like, okay, this is going to suck, right? Like I've heard about work being sucky for decades now. And your boss says one thing that's like a little bit rude, but not that bad to you. And you're like, yep, there it is. Work sucks. I knew it. They were right along. So you don't stick up for yourself.
Yeah.
You're like, okay, well, work sucks. And then life goes on and you're like, I think I might want a different job, something that pays a little better. And you don't view any potential opportunity through the lens of enjoyment or meaning or fulfillment. You view it through the lens of, I'm going to get a little bit more money because, work sucks, right? That's all there is. And then you go take a second job that you also believe sucks. And because you believe that, it starts to suck. And then that cycle goes on for a few decades.
Yeah.
And then some idiot like me on a podcast says you can rewire yourself. And if you do, what does that mean for all the times you didn't stand up for yourself, for all the opportunities you passed by because you thought you didn't deserve it? What does that do? It's really threatening to take out a core belief like that. It is so triggering to our lizard brain. And the only way to do it is to add in neurological, in a sense, support beams, just like they do in construction. So your support beam, if you are undoing the belief that work sucks, we're not going to go to work is amazing and I love it. We're going to go to work is hard right now.
Yeah.
And that's going to hold up some of your brain. We're taking it 1 degree away from work sucks to work is hard right now. We're going to move from there's no opportunities for me anywhere to I don't see the opportunity yet.
Okay.
And yet is one of my favorite words to tack on the end of a really sad thought.
Yeah.
And I have a lot more examples in the book of how you can train your brain not to do this 180, but chip away over time at some of these belief systems that hold all of us back, like work sucks or nice guys finish last or all the young people are lazy and entitled, like whatever belief you have. There's so many pervasive ones that the research debunks and in your gut, like this is not helping me out in my life.
Yeah.
You can make an inroad at that.
Yeah, I love a good HGTV metaphor, so I appreciate that. I think it makes it super easy to understand, though, right? Because the notion that language load-bearing belief, I think, is wonderful. Because I know I have them. I know I've had them. I know I've probably tried to remove them without putting up some support beams and dealt with the fallout. But I think the idea of sort of baby stepping it and just giving yourself permission to think of something 1 degree away that's maybe slightly more helpful to you feels really useful to me. I wanted to come back to the thing because you mentioned some of the beliefs and you mentioned the generational thing. And I can already hear, I'm a Gen Xer and like, I don't know, I'm on a lot of Gen X like groups on Facebook and Gen Z bashing is kind of like a sport. Just like telling Gen Xers like, okay, boomer is like the quickest way to like pierce our heart. But that generational thing is both sort of real and not real to me. Like meaning it's obviously very overgeneralized, but there is a sense, and I hear this from people I work with sometimes about this new generation is not seeing the value in hard work or whatever. How do you view some of those generational differences and then putting it through the lens of self-leadership? How do we deal with it ourselves? How do we navigate these perceptions that might be showing up for us?
So there's a Socrates quote, like 1,000 years ago, that says, the youth of today are lazy. They don't respect their elders. They've lost manners. They love chatter in the place of exercise. So the belief that all the young people right now, whether you're in Socrates time or 2025, are lazy and don't get it and blah, blah, blah. Like, it's not original. Okay. This has been going on for 1,000+ years.
Yeah.
Having said that, there are a couple of ways you can lead yourself out of that belief. First, consider the sample size, right? Are you judging an entire generation based off of 3 people you experienced poorly? Because I can certainly find some folks in any generation that don't know the value of hard work.
Yep.
Second, were you this wise at 22? Did you really get it? You were perfect at your job, right?
I totally did. Yeah. No.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay. Perfect. And I say that in good fun. Like, I was in a millennial. We were picked on for a long time. And I think that's why we don't pick on Gen Z, because like we got the brunt of the internet rage more than anyone else.
Yeah. Yeah. Fair.
And then lastly, the circumstances. Like, they don't get the value of hard work. Okay, what's the value that's being offered? Is it working with a master's degree for $12 an hour and they don't get the value of hard work?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Just a few thoughts for the griping.
Yeah, no, I can appreciate that. I mean, it always cracks me up a little bit just because Gen X, we had the slacker generation. So we were grunge and slacker, and that was like early 90s. That was kind of the stigma put upon us. And now we kind of look back and go, we're the work hard, play hard generation. I'm not even arguing that's true, because for part of my life that has been true. But we seem to just forget that like we were the slackers, and there was real truth to that. We were sort of raging against the machine, to sort of like use the band metaphor there. Like we were, and everybody does that in their own way. And yeah, to your point, I mean, you guys, the millennials, were the first to really sort of see that at scale. And then Gen Z is seeing it at an even more ridiculous scale and pace. And yeah, I think it's easy to get into that. But like you said, I appreciate like the ways of backing out of it. And also just, I don't think it's also all that helpful.
Then go mentor a young person if you think they have no values. Geez, get off Facebook. No offense to your generation.
I know we're Gen X is becoming the fist wagging generation already, but
the cycle. I'll be there one day.
I know. It's kind of fun, I will say. But to your point, yeah, like I work with some Gen Z folks in my coaching, and it's really interesting because none of that really shows up. And you're just talking to a person, like you said. It's just a person with normal. I don't know if I'm doing this right. I don't know if I should spend my whole life doing this kind of work. I don't know. Okay. I felt the same way when I was your age. Of course I did. So yeah, I appreciate that. I want to touch on something that has sort of mixed reviews in the world, but it's really popular right now. And I think you touch on this idea of sort of the importance of our reputation, and that's something we can manage and control. But reputation management shows up through the lens of personal branding. Right now. So I'm curious what your take is on personal branding, and if you have an approach to how somebody should think about that.
I mean, we're all building a personal brand. The question is whether you're conscious of yours or not. I think there's a lot of hullabaloo you could do around like, I'm going to have these 5 pillars and I'm going to go through this workbook based on this influencer. And if that is a valuable experience for you, fine. I think it comes back to the question of, how do you want to be known? How do you want people to feel when they see your name on the email, when they see you coming to the invite, when they see your name pop up on their phone? And operating with that in mind. Like, you don't need like, in my purpose and my values and it all lines up in the sheet. Like, let's save the navel gazing and just operate under the assumption that we are being remembered. And that isn't.
That's interesting. I mean, because I can see both sides of it. There's parts of me that I come from, advertising and branding. So I like the sort of navel gazing. I kind of do. But I also get the BS of it at times, that like, it's so crafted to not feel real at some point. And I think that's where I sort of sometimes sniff out personal branding and go, I don't love that, because it becomes so disingenuous and so obviously constructed, as opposed to what you're describing is more like, just show up with awareness.
Yeah.
Just know that people are going to notice some things, and you are having an impact on people just by existing in the world. And what do you want that to be? I'm curious, like in this world of uber crafted, curated everything, I mean, what's your take on the sort of the buzzy word authenticity?
Ooh, that's a big one. I have mixed views on authenticity.
Okay.
Part of me is annoyed it's as buzzy as it is
Mm-hmm.
because I think it was brought to the fore by straight, white, middle-aged men who paid no price for being authentic at work.
Interesting. Okay.
And that's the part that makes it feel thin to me. Like,
Okay.
like bring all of your full identity to work. Like, okay, like people get fired for that. Let's be honest.
Yeah.
The flip side of it is I have seen the world in the last 10 years be more accepting and more open. It's a messy thing because also like you shouldn't say everything to your boss. Like said Gen Z, this is a little piece of advice. Like they don't need to know every detail. Remember, you're being remembered.
Right.
So
Mm-hmm.
it's tricky. And I think this narrative of bring your whole self to work has been perpetuated by people who didn't face the consequences and has ignored the fact that sometimes there are consequences.
Yeah, I think that I get that. I would argue that everybody faces the consequences when they bring their whole self to work. I mean, meaning kind of the vomiting of ourself all over the place is never really a good thing. Just see me, take me.
It's not authenticity.
Yeah, it's not, but I think we think it is. We fool ourselves into thinking, and like this idea of whole self is like, well, that includes the crappy parts too, and I can bring some of that. And ultimately, nobody really wants that. I think I know somebody gave me a definition of authenticity that was something along the lines of, how can you bring the parts of yourself that will most serve others? And I thought, well, that's kind of a nice way of looking at it. It's like, don't hold back pieces of you that could be useful to others. That feels like an interesting lens. What do you think of that?
That lends a lot versus let me bring all my weird beliefs and childhood trauma out in this meeting that we're all in together.
Exactly. Yeah.
It's a messy topic.
Yeah. So I can appreciate that. I think I lean towards bring as much as you can and do it thoughtfully and do it again. I think through the lens of, can this be helpful in this situation to this person, to this room? Is there a reason why I want to talk about? Maybe there's a reason to talk about some trauma because the context makes room for it. But filtering, I think that that's the difference. There's always going to be a filter.
There's always going to be a filter, and you're being remembered.
Yeah.
And to believe that trauma dumping and like super niche beliefs or like whatever other mess you throw out in the middle of a meeting isn't going to be remembered even subconsciously in a performance review, in a promotion conversation, that's just ridiculous.
Yeah. That's a good point. So how did you come to all of this? I mean, you mentioned you kind of bounced around in sort of your earlier career. What sort of opened your eyes to, I have agency and I can have an impact on, and I have way more control over all this stuff than I think.
A lot of lessons learned the hard way.
Yeah.
So I started out in advertising. I quit my job as an account executive. I was selling Google AdWords, which made me feel really transactional and bad. Selling them to car dealerships, which also made me feel transactional and bad. Yeah. And I took a freelance project writing training for Google AdWords for like new sellers.
Okay.
And in that experience, I started to really like communication and teaching. I was always into like video and design and things like that. So it really fit my interest. Mm-hmm. And I decided I was going to go back to school to study organizational psychology and get a master's degree because I was so interested in this like training function.
Yeah.
And in graduate school, I studied employee engagement. And the belief that I'm bringing my best self to work, I care about this, I'm innovating, I'm putting forth discretionary effort, like what conditions make that? Because the research tells us when you have that, tons of other lagging indicators follow, like profitability, promotions on a micro and a macro level. So I set out in my thesis to say what makes employee engagement? Like, how can we make all the conditions to help someone be engaged? And I reached no conclusions. I was like a scientist, like, okay, if it's this much of a good boss and this much of a promotion and this much of their peers and this much of the economy, like, what is the recipe? And then I would think that I had it and I would talk to someone else. I interviewed hundreds of people who was highly engaged and they didn't have any of those factors. And it was maddening. And I eventually realized I was asking the wrong question. It wasn't what conditions make someone engaged. It is what skills are needed for someone to engage themselves in a variety of conditions. Yeah. And when I started asking the right question, things got a lot easier. And I was able to identify the mindsets and the skill sets that I now refer to as self-leadership that enable someone to meet an imperfect role and thrive.
Yeah, I can see how that flip changes everything. And it sort of begs the question for me, because part of me goes, well, yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And part of me goes, are we letting organizations off the hook? Meaning, is there nothing they can do to sort of, even if there's not a perfect recipe to create engagement, is there are there some guidelines for them to operate under to invite people to at least figure out how they want to engage?
For sure. It's not like they have no responsibility. Like throwing a handful of asshole managers into the equation isn't helping anybody.
Yeah.
So there are certainly some levers at the organization's disposal. Having said that, the sentiment that I wrote in Leading Yourself and that I continue to operate with is, yes, organizations should improve. That's only one part of the equation. If you wait for them, you're the one that pays the price.
Yeah.
Holding your breath that they're going to make it better is going to kill you. It's going to erode your career momentum. It is going to sap your energy. You can only control yourself. So yeah, I talk a lot about and I write a lot about all the things organizations can do to facilitate engagement. But the reality is, even when they do that, some people won't be engaged because they don't have the skills of self-leadership. Yeah. And most of them aren't going to do that.
So with that, and I know the engagement numbers are always sort of depressing. They're always, I don't even know, 20-something% or whatever. People are engaged usually. Do we think that that's just sort of a fixed number? Or do you see that there's room for that number to shift?
A lot of problems with Gallup and the way they measure engagement. Okay. I don't think it's accurate.
Okay.
Their engagement questions are like, I got meaningful feedback. Like when you look through the questions, it positions engagement as everyone else's responsibility. And humans are always willing to identify the wrongs of other people. None of those questions are, I proactively brought growth opportunities that I want to my manager. Yeah. We know that indicates engagement. They're not assessing it. Anyway, I will, I'll save myself from the rabbit hole of why their surveys are so flawed. Okay. And say, I don't think that is a static number. I've witnessed thousands of people change themselves without changing their jobs, hundreds of thousands at this point. But I think the way we measure it isn't working, and the bar we set around it is wrong. So if we continue to do both of those things, I don't think that number will change. But that number doesn't mean a lot.
Yeah, no, I like that perspective, and it makes me think, okay, you should be designing a better employee engagement survey framework so that people there's room for the self-leadership side of the equation. But that's another day, I will say. I wanted to give you a chance.
Live, I'll be doing that.
What's that?
It's catch me on LinkedIn Live. Later this year, I'm going to do a takedown of the survey and a redesign from the self-leadership point of view.
Oh, I love that. I'm looking forward to that. So I've asked you a fair number of questions. As we start to wind down here, I want to give you a chance to pose a question to our audience.
The question I would pose to the audience is, what is really wrong? What really sucks? Because we can sit in this narrative of it sucks and it's unfair and I don't like it. But until you zoom in on what it actually is it this one thing your boss is doing that's making your whole job suck? Is it these two people in this other department that is making your whole job suck? Until you can zoom in on the specific thing and take a self-leadership approach to changing it, it's not going to change. So I think my question would be zoom in on your gnarly attitude and figure out what's causing it.
Yeah. Yeah. That's fun. It already had me zooming in on some previous jobs, and I'm going to play with that. So we've talked about some of this probably already, but like if you could wave a magic wand and create a fully desuckified work world, what does that look like?
I think that looks like Disneyland, but a more real, and not the people working, the people participating.
Yeah.
I think the more sustainable and achievable route would be a workplace that is baseline annoying and no one is victim to garbage or abusive circumstances. Everyone has the skill set to be empowered in the face of normal annoyance.
I kind of like the idea of that being a part of the training at a job is sort of the bringing.
Well, it is for companies who hire me.
Yeah. And but I think that should be like a thing, right? Like, hey, this is kind of the reality, but we're going to give you skills to deal with the reality. There's something refreshingly frank about that. Yeah. I love it. So I like to have a little fun before we go. And I always invite our guests to give us a sound effect. You'll hear sound effects on the show all the time, cats and whatever. So do you have a desuckified sound that you can bring into the mix?
Yeah, I'm going to go with wheel.
So what's the any meaning behind that sound?
Well, I was trying to think of what's the opposite of womp, womp, womp. Like what has energy and momentum.
Mm-hmm.
And that is what I came up with. Because
I like it. Yeah.
I can't do a cat sound as good as you, despite having a cat.
That's all right. I like that sound. That's awesome. So where do people find you and learn more about what you're doing, your book, and everything else?
My book is everywhere books are sold. I have a lot of classes on LinkedIn Learning, and I put out free content on LinkedIn at Elizabeth Lotardo. You can also check out my website, elizabethlotardo.com. I have a lot of my HBR pieces there and some more resources.
Awesome. Well, I'll point people there in the show notes as well. Thanks, Elizabeth. This was really fun, really eye-opening, and I appreciate your willingness to kind of call BS on some of the stuff that's out there.
Back at you. It's a noble mission.
Thank you. All right. Take care. Bye-bye.
You too.
Thanks, everyone, for tuning in to the Desuckify Work Podcast. And a huge thanks to Elizabeth for bringing straight talk and motivating insights to the show. You can follow Elizabeth on LinkedIn and check out her site at elizabethlotardo.com. Also, be sure to grab a copy of her book. It's awesome. If you enjoyed the conversation and would like to help your teams find their superpower, aka their pudding, so they can bring their absolute best to work, I invite you to schedule a free half-hour discovery session. Bye, everyone.